We have Dr. Leslie McLees joining us via Zoom to talk about how we can market ourselves and the experience we've gained as students in the job market. So Leslie has given an adaptation of this talk at the American Association for Geographers conference for a couple of years now, and she continues to help students explore career paths outside of academia in her work as a senior advisor and program director at the University of Oregon's Geography Department. She also served as my advisor during my time at the University of Oregon, so she's helped me a lot, and I'm sure she'll help you guys as well. But yeah, anyways, I'm really excited to have her here. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Kate. Just to make sure, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sweet. All right. So, like Kate said, I am here at the University of Oregon. I'm the director of undergrad studies, and I do a lot of advising. And I developed our first career readiness course for a major several years ago. Now I teach it college-wide with a person from the Career Center. And I work informally and more formally with some of our graduate students too. And I've had my own experiences trying to figure out what to do with all of these degrees and stuff. So I do come at this from a personal angle, but also just recognizing there's a lot of different experiences out there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I told Kate as we were getting set up that I actually have a worksheet that I'm going to stick in the chat at the end. That is, I'm sorry, it's not a worksheet. It just has a links to some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So one of the things I want to make sure to set this up, sorry, is that there's a lot of different career pathways for anybody. One of my main tenets is that majors or programs or fields of study don't link always to specific degrees. And I think a lot of times people get really concerned about what can I do with a degree in geography, or what can I do with this degree in natural resource management, which might seem easier to think about, but also it's almost sometimes limiting to really constrain the academic field with a potential degree. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is kind of stepping back from that a little bit. And there's a lot of self-reflection exercises and all this type of stuff that you can think about, but really giving you some concrete strategies. And the worksheet that I keep calling it a worksheet, the companion piece, whatever, will give you those so that you can have them after this talk. So just there we go, a brief overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of well, I already gave you my brief intro, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what is career readiness, and then a little bit extra about kind of some of the challenges that I see with that graduate students articulate. And then a lot of what we'll talk about is some of this critical self-reflection is how I frame it, to think about who you are and where you want to go. And you are more than just a graduate student. You are a human. You've had a whole set of experiences that you can draw from. And so the stuff that I'll talk about is really meant to have you kind of step back just a bit and think more holistically, and then show you how powerful that can be as you translate a lot of that into a job search. And we'll end with some, I think, very tangible and actionable, wow, those are big words, strategies that you can use to do that. So a lot of the lingo right now in this world is around career readiness. We used to call this professional development, but career readiness is really just this idea of preparing for a career by developing certain skills. And this is pretty distinct from the job. Sorry, it's not totally distinct, but it overlaps with the job search, but it is a little bit different focus, where you're really self-assessing, reflecting, thinking about who you are, where you want to go. And the job search is the actual like Googling for jobs or networking or whatever that is. So you need to do the first part to do the second part well. It's certainly possible to get a job without doing the first part, but I think it's more satisfying and effective to do the first part first. I'm not going to talk about resumes and cover letters and all that stuff. That's kind of what happens after this. But if you do this well, then hopefully all of that communication about what you can do becomes a lot easier. So it surprises people that the top skills that people are looking for are really around these types of things. We tend to get really caught up in like, oh, I don't know how to do that function in Excel, I can't apply for this job, or I don't know statistics that well, or I don't know that programming language, whatever it is. Being able to learn is actually a really important job skill too. So recognize that while these are kind of broad categories, as you start thinking about what you've done in your life, and especially in school, and how you can mobilize those experiences to articulate these broader transferable skills, as well as the more specific skills you might have developed. So, well, I just wanted to introduce this idea and kind of the framework that I'm using around what it means to be career ready, and then how that translates. So, I don't know if you guys have seen PhD comics. I used to read them a lot when I was in PhD program. And my youngest daughter is obsessed with zombies right now, and I thought this was a very nice graphic. But if you can think back about why you originally decided to go to graduate school, when I was a graduate student, and then when I talked to some of our other graduate students, a lot of the responses tend to be, I want to learn more about a certain subject, or they wanted to get a certain kind of experience. A lot of it tends to be, I don't have enough skills to get a job, which when I talk to undergraduates, I try to show them that yes, they do have a lot of skills to get a job, as we all do. So then it becomes, and then there's people like me, and to be honest, like I didn't know what else to do, and I knew how to be a student, and that's how I ended up in graduate school. It's not the best reason to go. It worked out pretty well for me in the end, but it's really thinking back to what you started from, and maybe you didn't know what else to do, and that's fine too. But regardless, how have you developed? Really being able to think about what you've done since you started, through some of the things that we'll talk about in a few minutes, it can be really powerful. I still find that when I talk with graduate students, they're like, now I have more, or I'm overeducated, or I'm overqualified, or I don't still have enough skills. This is a I don't know, psychological challenge more than a practical challenge. And that problem right there of I'm in school, but I don't really have any skills, is really what I'm trying to get past. When we think about why people, like society tells us that we need to go to college or get these degrees to get a better job, universities are terrible at helping students translate what they're doing in school to a career, right? You have a major or a program of study, and we kind of put all of our emphasis on the subject rather than the skills that we're developing. And I think that's a structural issue with academia, and how, academics are seen for the knowledge that they have, and but it would be hard for them to articulate that knowledge if they didn't also have some very well developed skill sets, right? So some of what I find, the more degrees you have, it's almost the too much overlap between kind of subject area and skills. So breaking that apart a little bit is helpful. And then, so I skipped ahead there a little bit. The biggest issue I get when I talk to graduate students is that they're overqualified, and employers don't really want to hire them because of some sense of being overqualified. But what that's really, the idea of being overqualified, is it really possible to have too many skills? Employers are really concerned that you're going to get bored, and that's often why they worry about people being overqualified. And so it's really important not to rely on your degree, like I have a master's degree and therefore I will be good at this job. That's not really helping an employer see what you can actually do. So again, that's part of that separating out the subject versus the skill sets that you're using to generate knowledge or learn more about that subject. So as you're thinking about some of the stuff we'll talk about, really remember that distinction. It's hard to say that you're too overqualified for something if you actually just break it down into the skills. And yes, you can be overqualified, but then if someone says that to you, they're really just wanting to know that you are committed to that type of position. And even if you have much higher communication skills or technical skills, but you're really interested in the thing, then you just have to convey that. So I've been hinting forward towards this, but to get where you're going, you need to know where you are, and I'm a geographer, I love a good map metaphor. The framework I use to really help you understand who you are and where you want to go is around this, of course, it's a great acronym for it, the VIPs. And so I'm going to go through each of these and hopefully give you some really tangible ideas of how to think about these things and how they can connect to your job search. And I'm going to take a drink of water real fast. Okay, so the first part of that VIPs is this values. I find, even for myself, and when I talk to others, you know, what do you value is a very broad term, and it can apply in a lot of different contexts. You'll have kind of life values, whether you value things like honesty and happiness and all of that. But why you work and who you want to work for and how you want to interact with people, and even the kind of work that you do is really going to be your satisfaction with that is really going to be a reflection of the values that you have. So I have this worksheet that we use in our class, and I've used it in workshops and such before, is just thinking about what are those core values. It's very important to be able to articulate those. And of course, there's always more that you can add to these lists. But then when you start getting into things like the kinds of work situations that you want to be in, or work environments, do you want it to be super structured, or are you someone who can work a little more or likes to work a little more independently? Is a value of yours to be able to earn a certain amount of money, which is okay, by the way. I mean, given context, whatever. No, it's not here to judge you for it, but it's here for you to understand what kind of income you need or want in order for your life. Do you want work that's intellectually challenging? All of these things. And then there's a little more like, how do you want to interact with people? How do you value different types of leadership? And then this last one is really the actual work part of it, like the things that you do in your job. And really kind of pulling these apart is really just useful as you're looking at job advertisements or talking to people in different industries and at different organizations about how they work and how they interact and the type of work that they do and all that kind of stuff. So when you're reading a job ad, you can see whether or not you would match it. And then when you're talking to someone or in an interview or a cover letter, you can use these types of words to connect with it more. So this is one of these links that will be in that additional sheet that I'll send out. I also, these practical tips down here, every single one says, better yet, find a group to work with and discuss. I personally love this work. However, finding the hour or so every once in a while to sit down and do it is not in my skill set sometimes, because I've got a life and kids and a house and a job. And I find it helps me to work, like if I had a reading group or something. So I'm gonna encourage that if people are interested in exploring some of this. Like, do the values inventory, take your 15 minutes or whatever, and then next week meet people over coffee and kind of just talk about it. It's kind of hard at first maybe, but you get used to it and it's kind of fun. So the second aspect is the interests. Really important to remember that interests are not hobbies. Photography is not an interest. It would reflect an interest. The subjects that you're studying are not necessarily interests, but they do reflect certain types of interests. This model here is a pretty common one used. We call it the RIASEC model for the acronym there. And it was developed from a guy a while back who did interviews with people who were good at their jobs and who liked their jobs to try and understand what motivated them or made them successful in them. And I'll say that I'll have a couple of these types of assessments on here. I do not want you to take these and then say, this is what I am or who I am, and these are the types of jobs I should get. They're just really meant for reflection. As I've kind of gone backwards throughout kind of my career trajectory and thought about these different assessments and models and such, it really helps me understand the trajectory I've taken and why I love my job now really gets reflected in this model. So if you take something like this assessment, which is, you know, beautifully designed, it'll ask you to kind of just pick a bunch of stuff. And that's fine, it's kind of fun use of 8 minutes of your time. And then at the end, it gives you some kind of code, which is basically like, for me, my code is S, I, and A. So my strongest motivator is social. I am a helper. I love helping people. It is who I am. And it really helps me see like how I've ended up in the type of positions that I have and what's possible for the future too. My second was investigative and third was weirdly for me artistic. I'm not an artistic person, but over time I realized there's this kind of like your first code is your motivator, and then your strategy and tool are kind of maybe these second ones. And after thinking about this for a while, I thought I have the best tagline. I enjoy helping people by creatively solving problems. And that is what I do in teaching, it's what I do in advising and other types of mentorship. If I was to get a different job doing something else, that would be my core interest. That would be what I want to do for my job, right? So it's really kind of interesting to think through what all of these things do and what they mean and how they work together. You know, someone with my RIASEC code is often that you should be an advisor and a teacher, and great, that works well. But I had a colleague who typed out as like enterprising and then social and then realistic or something. And he was a great advisor too. So it's not that everyone has to have the same motivations or interests to bring them to a type of position. And in fact, of course, having those different interests, I learned a lot from him and he learned a lot from me. So just really trying to emphasize that this is not meant to determine anything about you, but it's a point of reflection that can really help you understand what it is that drives you to do the work that you want, that you do, and potentially do in the future. So the third one is personality. This is probably the one that people roll their eyes at a little bit, because the idea that your personality determines what you're gonna do is, I agree, very problematic. I don't know if people have heard of 16personalities.com, but it's one more of these, it's a free online assessment to go to assess kind of various types. This is clearly based originally, but it's different, on the Myers-Briggs testing instrument, which is where that extroverted, introverted stuff comes from. And I have again found out that this does, I think I connect with the results pretty well here, but I've also learned a lot and felt really validated because when I was in graduate school, I was one of those people in a seminar who didn't talk much, and I would sit there and be like, I have so many things to say, and I just don't find the space to say them. I'm a very internal processor, which is another part of this introversion characteristic. And we did like an on-paper version of this, a quick and dirty one, back when I was in graduate school. And the instructor, he was like, okay, so everyone who's an introvert, raise your hand. So a bunch of us kind of shyly raise our hands. And he told everyone to look at us and then say, these people are not quiet because they don't know what's going on. They're quiet because they're bringing in all this information, and it takes a lot of energy to kind of sit there with it, process it, and then find the space to speak out and kind of have their thoughts complete. It was one of the most validating experiences I've had, especially in academia. But other things like this kind of feeling, I'm very touchy-feely and empathetic. And I realized after doing this, it really helped me to make my syllabus language much stronger so that I wasn't constantly having to make exceptions and doing the emotional labor, which I'm fine with a little bit. But when people start asking a lot of you, being able to put up a little bit of boundaries around myself and also feeling validated that like, it's okay that I'm empathetic, touchy-feely person. I just need to protect myself a little bit. So there's a lot that you can learn from these kinds of assessments. And the idea that, you know, you get through this and then they tell you, you know, what kind of job you could have, what kind of relationships you should be in, all that kind of stuff. Again, just meant for reflection, but you can come up with a lot of strengths and weaknesses in these types of things too. Not strengths and strengths and challenges might be a better way to say that. Where I'm not a good planner, I just am not. But I know that about myself now, and I have a few strategies I use to try and compensate. My color-coded Google Calendar is a thing to behold, but it's so yeah. So just kind of thinking through how that personality, the work environment maybe, or the way you interact with people, your ability to plan, or your need for someone else to structure a little bit more, can really help you in understanding kind of the kinds of work environments that you want to be in. So the last part is around these skills. And this is, of course, kind of the biggest section of how we think about going on to finding jobs, right? Like, what are my skills? One thing I really like to remind people is that you're actually an entire person, not just a graduate student or a student of some kind. And that you can bring experiences and find connections between things you do through your school, your research in school, and you could connect those to things, other things, whether it's hobbies or other organizations you've been involved in. I recently semi-interviewed for this thing on campus, and I was the president of a parent board at the preschool, and I was able to really articulate connections by focusing on my skills rather than the context, so that I could talk about some of my values and some of the things I've learned too through making mistakes, which is a very important thing to remember. It's good to show that you can learn from mistakes. So don't worry about thinking about the things that you didn't do well, but talk about how you recovered from that and developed and learned. So really thinking about the skills that you are doing are actually really broad, right? Communication or critical thinking, those are really broad. So it's really helpful to dial down and think, okay, written communication. How have I demonstrated or developed, sorry, my written communication skills? And you're writing theses and maybe academic articles and papers for classes, and you're learning, right? So when I was in grad school, I had problem writing in passive voice a lot, and I didn't really understand what that was until someone sat down with me and showed me, and then I realized, oh yeah, that's terrible writing. And I've developed some strategies to not do that, and it's improved my writing quite a bit. And you can talk about successes you've had, maybe you've gotten journal articles published or whatever it is. But also thinking, you know, you're doing research, you're doing, I don't know, qualitative and or quantitative. Those are broad categories that not everyone really knows what they mean. But maybe certain kind of statistical software or analyses, or even qualitative surveys, interviews, focus groups. If you actually sat down and wrote down all the things that you've done just as a graduate student, you'd be surprised how long that list is. And then if you're writing it in kind of everyday people language, it's easy to translate that to any sort of other career. If you focus on, I'm writing academic articles, that's great, but people outside of academia aren't going to care about that. They're not going to really understand what kind of writing that is. They're going to think maybe it's too obtuse and they can't understand it. So really just use plain language to describe what you're doing and inventory everything that you can. Have you written grant applications, right? Have you interviewed people? Have you had to work with the community to either gain access to land or to, you know, set up focus groups, whatever it is? All of those things actually matter in the process of developing skills, and they're easy to translate to non-academic settings. And I should say, like, I've over the years looked at jobs outside of academia, and the language that gets used in a lot of kind of especially private industry type of jobs is so different than what we use in academia. I'm gonna talk about networking in a few minutes, and that is a really good place to understand how those things can be translated. So there is this skills assessment. It's not my favorite assessment, but it's a brainstorming thing that you can do where it asks you a bunch of questions, and it just, again, kind of thinking about what if you need to get started, like what those skills might be. Okay, so now what? If you've self-inventoried all of these things, now you just have to learn how to communicate it. I have this story from when I was in a PhD program. My advisor, who Kate knows, she was part of this program eventually, this Carnegie, Oregon, and we were associated with the Carnegie Foundation. I've already forgotten what it's called, but like something about peace and international affairs. And we had this really nice reception for the head of that organization, and we brought them to Eugene. We had, nice drinks and cocktails and all this stuff. And I'm, of course, introverted that I am, over on the side, being a wallflower, talking to my friends. And my advisor walks up to me and he says, "Follow me." This is how he is. Okay, fine. We walk over and I stand, he goes, "Leslie, this is Joel Rosenthal from the Carnegie International Peace thing." And he's like, "Joel, this is Leslie. She's my PhD student. Leslie, tell Joel about your research." And I forgot everything that I knew. I'd been out of the field. I was writing my dissertation. I'd done some really cool work on urban farming in Tanzania and urban development. And I had no clue how to talk about it outside of the context of talking to another academic. And I fumbled and then looked at my advisor, and he explained my research, which was super embarrassing. And it was this moment of like, that was a really missed opportunity. And so practicing talking about what you've done and how you've applied it. The research stories are cool because that's kind of the interesting part, but really focusing on the skills you've developed and how they translate to other contexts is really important. It's funny to me that I am such a proponent of networking because I am a pretty introverted person and I'm not outgoing, but we're all networked, turns out. I think, Kate, I can't remember actually if you did this activity, but there's an activity we do in our classes and in workshops where I even probably can't see me very well, but you have a ball of string. One person holds the end and says, you stand in a big circle with like 15 people and you say, "I'm kind of interested in a job in urban planning, maybe for the government, something." And someone in the circle might know someone who either works for the organization or government institution that you are interested in working for, or know someone who works on urban planning in the private sector. And so you throw the ball of string to them. It gets funny because the string goes everywhere sometimes. And I'm a big fan of humor to break the ice. And then the next person says, "Oh yeah, my uncle works for, the Department of Transportation in Chicago." Sorry. And then, so that's a network, like that's a connection. And then that person holds the string at the node and says, "I'm interested in working in fisheries to restore salmon habitat." And that's more specific, but someone else might know someone who works in fisheries. Like, it's just about demonstrating we all know a lot of people and we all don't think about them as professional network, but your family, your friends, families, coworkers, people you play sports with, go to church with, all the things. It's really cool to think of who you know knows. And so being able to talk about yourself to the people you do know means that when they go talk to people that they know, they're like, "Oh yeah, I know someone who does that. You should meet them." That's networking too. And then the other big thing that I really strongly suggest everybody do is an informational interview. It's at this point where I often ask, has anyone ever done one of these before? And a few people raise their hand and everyone else looks terrified. But again, once you've kind of recognized like, oh, my friend has somebody who would be a cool person to talk to, you say, "Hey, could I get their information?" and talk to them. I do recommend doing that in person or over Zoom so that you can kind of have that human connection. And but this is where you get to learn about what it's like to work at a specific organization or work at a specific organization or in a specific type of job, like whether it's fisheries for the, I don't know, fisheries, but yeah, fisheries for the, something in the private sector or the government sector or the nonprofit sector, or you're interested in working at a nonprofit and someone knows someone at a different kind of nonprofit, but still it gives you some insight into that world. Also gives you a chance to make that professional connection and expand your own network, and then be like, what is it like to work in this industry? What is it like to work for this organization? And you can also learn that this is not what you want to do, and that's okay. And then it's, you know, could I, do you have anyone else I could talk to? And do you have any advice for someone who's looking to get into the industry, or how to translate my skills from academia to this sector? Turns out people really like talking about themselves in these conversations. I'm sure it's happened, but I've never heard about it in the several hundred I've assigned where people think it was just awful and they didn't learn anything. It's always really surprising to me how much people do learn and take away from this. So again, this, actually, I think, yeah. So again, giving yourself time and space, no matter where you are in your program, is really important. Give yourself time and space to reflect. Where are you? And what do you want to do? And then thinking, what is it I bring to that, including my values and aspects of my personality, and the interests that motivate me, in addition to all of the skills that you bring. I also want to give a shout out to overcoming imposter syndrome. I'm not sure you can ever fully overcome it, but it's a very common thing in academia, no matter what level you're at. But getting that confidence around who you are and what you can do is a really good way to help you overcome the barriers that imposter syndrome can put up for you. And then help you getting over that idea, that challenge of connecting to people through networking. It's just really recognizing you're not overqualified. That kind of a comment for an advanced degree is not should not be an out of hand dismissal. It's just a bit on you to really explain what you can do, not let people get intimidated by the idea that you have an advanced degree. Excuse me. And then I guess these practical tips at the bottom, really being able to, I really strongly suggest having just, I don't know, 5 people who are willing to meet up at a coffee shop once a month or every 2 weeks or something and just talk. And then being able to identify jobs through your network. If you, alumni, and you can use LinkedIn to find alumni, but alumni are really great resources, especially if they've left academia, because you can see the various paths that they've taken. I didn't set this up, but you can find alumni from your school on LinkedIn, and if you Google that, you'll figure out how to do it. You can sort them by major or program, by where they live. It's kind of creepy. But then reaching out to someone and saying, hey, I'm a student in this program and I see you were too. I'm curious how you did this. Can we meet for coffee or meet over Zoom? It's actually not too hard to do. So not everyone will respond, but once you get someone, it's usually a very fruitful conversation. So that's all I have. And I've got a ton of other things I could say, but I'll stop here. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hi Leslie, it's Kate. What are some examples of like questions you could ask during an informational interview?
Yeah, usually a great start off, and I know it can be, again, as someone who's pretty introverted, I get this, like, okay, awkward meeting, shake hands and sit down. You know, asking like, how did you get from school to where you are? Like, what was your career path? And another thing that this can reveal is that most people's career paths are not here to here. They're kind of like here to here to here to here to here, you know, all over the place. And that's really useful to hear. And then just being able to listen to that and then ask those questions. But what's your career path been like is a great opener. And then you want to say, like, what kinds of skills do you think someone getting this kind of job or whatever whatever industry, what kinds of skills do you think I should work on? Or should I focus on? There's always the, do you know someone else who I could talk to that could kind of help me think about this career path or some kind of alternative career path? Those are kind of the big ones, I'd say, but from my experience, once you get someone talking, they're gonna say things that you're gonna respond to with questions too, like, oh, well, did you have to move for that? Or even things like how did you negotiate your benefits package? Like, what are some strategies around that, particularly if they're at an organization that you're interested in working in? So you don't want to ask them a lot of personal stuff per se, unless that becomes a part of the conversation, but really focusing on their career path and the advice that they could give someone who's entering that field. I'll also add that I kind of said this at the beginning, but a lot of people focusing on the job search. When I talk to people about teaching a class on career readiness, they're like, oh, that's just how to write resumes and do interviews. That's actually the easy part. So all this other stuff makes the resumes and cover letters and interviews and networking a lot easier. A lot of these things are things you can kind of Google and look up online on how to do them, but having the specific language to be able to connect yourself with a person or with a job or an institution is really important. That's not quite, it's a bit of a tangent on the informational interview question, but a lot of times people are more concerned about the resumes and cover letters, and that's important, but I think this background work tends to bring a lot more success when people are focused on it.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm just wondering if you have like a recommended way to kind of keep track of all this information, like in a journal or something, so that like maybe you can do this now, but like you're not applying for jobs for like a little while. Thing.
Yeah, I think this is the idea of keeping track does not play to my strength. So this is something I have thought a lot about. For me, like a lot of the advice is have a notebook, right? That you can section off where you inventory everything or reflect on things. I'm increasingly using my Google spreadsheets because I've gotten so good at my phone at being able to just do everything on the fly that when I'm thinking about something, I want to get it written down. But I think if you've got a spreadsheet or a journal and you've just got a page that's, say, just inventorying your skills, that you don't put too many constraints on, keep these kind of brainstormy. Don't confine yourself too much early on, especially, because then when you see a job ad that connects with you, you can go back and kind of cherry pick the things that fit it really well. And if you've got kind of some experiences around that you can use to demonstrate that, then it becomes pretty easy. I say all this, again, I'm not the most organized person, and so really struggling over the years to figure out ways to track all of that too. And I didn't emphasize this either, but storytelling is really how you want to convey these things. Like, find a couple of experiences, note them in however you're tracking them. You don't have to write out the whole thing, but you know, I think I used this example earlier on being president of the parent board, which is a very different experience than anything I've done in academia in many ways. But I have it written down or I have it kind of as part of my stories because it dovetails really well. It kind of complements really well some of the things about myself that I would want to promote. And so I do have a page in an Excel sheet with just some keywords from story or keywords to remind me of the stories I want to use to tell. And you know, everyone talks about stories now. It's actually really legit because I don't know, I think our brains are wired to remember stories, not lists of information. And so if you can put it in that story form, and it also just gives people other kind of key things to remember about what was interesting about your story too. So, but yeah, keep it does kind of depend on your organizational style, but do it because it will help when you're nervous about writing a resume quickly or something to be able to remember all the things about yourself.
And there isn't any more questions, well, we'll send out Leslie's email so you can contact her directly, but I sent a link to the drive in the doc, or a link to the document. In the chat,
Just hit send.
and Leslie just sent it again, and maybe we could circulate that to start or something.
Can I add one tidbit I recently learned that I think it
Yeah.
has more to do with when you're looking at job ads. So this is my brain, it's just all over the place, so remembering things randomly, but you know, doing these inventories is really useful, having the words and language, coming up with your stories, but then you go look at a job ad, right? Or someone tells you about a job. And you're like, oh, I still don't meet these qualifications. I think, so I've been hearing this a lot lately, standard practice or way maybe approach of it, if you meet about 60% of the qualifications, you should apply. Because HR people are writing these for their dream person. There's very few of those out there. Be willing to learn. You don't need to say what you don't know, but emphasize how you've learned things or, you know, something related to what they want that you could totally learn it. And that's something that your graduate degree should also, you know, be highlighted. So I've talked a lot about all this background work, but it's really important in developing that confidence that it's okay if you don't meet every qualification. But if you're interested in the job and you can express like some kind of passion, interest, value, whatever, go for it and see what happens. So, and then networking too, all of that through networking too. So anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. Should I just go?
Oh,